And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Prince Jackson. He is the co-host of Nightlight, a horror movie podcast on the Bloody Disgusting Podcast Network. Welcome to the show.
Yeah,
Hello.
Thank you so much. This is a long time coming. 2 years in the making, I think.
Oh, I know. Such a long time coming. Yeah, it really has been forever. So I'm really glad that we finally were able to get you on the show,
Have
Prince.
we been doing it for this long? Oh, Jesus.
Girl.
You ever think about how long you've been podcasting and you're like, never mind, I don't want to think about how long you've been doing
I don't even want to think about it, you know? But no, thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
Thank you for joining us. And so one of the things we like to start off with is we want to know, how did you get into horror? How did you get introduced to the genre?
Oh, God. So the horror genre, I guess, while I was a child, love-hate relationship, right? I mean, it was just like, oh, shit, I'm terrified. But at the same time, I'm just like, ooh, I'm curious. Like, you know, so it's like, it's such an interesting relationship I had with it, to the point where I didn't know how to truly react to it. So I grew up in predominantly like Christian home. And upon me growing up in that household, it was interesting. Like, my family gave me quite a bit of freedom, but I was like the baby in the family, which usually is the thing. So I got a little bit more freedom, but I also have an older brother who's 7 years older than me. And we always would hang out with our cousins who are also 7 years older than I. So,
okay.
Yeah. So they used to try to do the most heinous shit and try to scare me as much as possible. Like, literally, like sleepovers, coming into the room, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. And I'm just like, I'm like 6 and I'm fucking traumatized. So like, I'm trying to genuinely just like, was trying to get a grasp of it all. And it wasn't until like my brother would try to just show me just the most ridiculous things, like Nightmare on Elm Street. I actually didn't see Halloween until I was in high school, so that took a little bit of time. But when it was Child's Play, that was like the main thing that he would also try to show me a lot as well. He just thought Chucky would scare the shit out of me, when it was actually quite the opposite. I was just like, that I'm kind of neutral on that one. I'm lukewarm, so let's crank it up a notch. But I want to say what really got my fascination in horror was cartoon episodes for Halloween. So like little Halloween specials, specifically Hey Arnold, the Halloween special, because they always did them, and it was fantastic. We had the aliens, that was pretty much War on the Worlds. We had the Ghost Train episode.
Oh my god, the Ghost Train episode is so fucking scary and good.
It's so good.
I totally forgot about that one. That one's so creepy.
Very. And like, it was shit like that I knew, like, okay, I have a fascination with this type of stuff, and I know that something is probably going to happen to the point where I'm just going to watch horror films on my own. So it got to the point where my brother was trying to scare me with Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003, the remake. And I was like, okay, fuck him. I'm going to go ahead and watch this first. So I watched it first, and I was like, all right, this is how it's going to happen. So I knew where every single jump scare was going to happen. I knew all the shit. So when it was time for us to watch it, I was like, all right, great. So I'm going to get him at the best possible time. I want to say it was around when Jessica Biel was like walking around the house. And right when she was walking in the house, I was like, oh, I'm going to get some water or something. And mind you, I'm like 12 at this point in time. So like, I'm like, all right, fuck, I'm going to get some water or something, you know, I'll be right back. I leave out, and when I'm coming back in, we have this island set up in our house. I drop to the ground screaming, and I'm like frantic, throwing my water and like spilling it on the ground just to scare the living shit out of my brother. He has never tried showing me another horror film ever since then. It turns out I'm the one who's the fucking horror addict now, and I just want to watch horror 24/7.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it seriously was absolutely ridiculous on how that all started. And then as time passed and like high school came around, I was really into bootlegging horror films at that time, as I'm sure all of us kind of was. So like LimeWire was a thing, and torrenting and Pirate Bay and all sorts of stuff. So I have my local bootleg guy.
FBI, if you're listening to this, no, you're not. We never did that. Never done that in my life.
Never done it a single day of my life.
Never.
This is an entertainment podcast. We are making shit up.
Exactly. This is all fiction. All fiction. So with our local bootlegger, like, he would always hit me up and be like, hey, I got this new horror film. I have no idea what it's about, but I got it. And I'm like, cool, send it to me. So I would usually get most of my horror content from him.
Wow.
And it's how I've watched Martyrs. It's how I watched Frontiers. It's how I watched Trick or Treat back when it came out technically in 2007. It's how I watched a lot of this stuff. And I want to say, when you guys remember that festival, it was kind of weird. Like, they would show it in some theaters every so often, but it was 8 Films to Die For.
Yes!
You guys remember that? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Lake Mungo was one of them. That's how I found Lake Mungo, because it was one of those, which is so weird though.
It's why I stayed away from those movies for forever, because I thought that it was like little terrible like movies that they had packaged together and just were like trying to shell off on people. So I stayed away from all of those movies because I thought they're gonna suck.
Sure. No, that's fair. I was all in. Like, you just bought the tickets online, they did an age check, and it was each day the way that it worked. And I went until I want to say it was Horrorfest 4. Is when I kind of stopped going, but like the very first time, like, it was where I saw the Hamiltons, Grave Dancers, like, it was just all these like very obscure horror films that you just normally wouldn't, I guess, think about, especially in the mid 2000s and late 2000s. So it's just like, fuck, this is great. And none of my friends were into it, so I would go by myself. Yep. That's usually how it works.
Oh god, I'm gonna go through a deep dive of all of these now that you're reminding me. I'm looking them up, and I'm like, fuck, I'm gonna have to do it. There's only 5. There's only 5 of them. That's what, like 35, 40
movies? Yeah, something like that.
That's nothing.
Do that in a weekend.
Yeah, honestly though, like, it's a whole bunch of different films in there that I feel like we don't talk about enough. Like, for example, Butterfly Effect 3. Like, what the fuck?
What?
Exactly.
There's 3 of them?
That sounds terrible. I'm just going to tell you that right now.
It is so good. It is so
really
good. Butterfly Effect 3 is really, really good. And it's weird because, like, I've never seen the second one. I've never even tried hunting the second one down.
I didn't know there were 3.
I didn't either until it came out. And I was so into it. It was really, really interesting. And there's another one, Deaths of Ian Stone, which is also one.
That cover had like the weird lizard arm, and I always remember seeing that.
Yes. God. And I guess the one that's the most popular is Lake Mungo, but you just had so many that were in there that even Frontiers, I think, was actually a part of that.
I just saw that Frontiers was in there, which I was like, oh shit, I didn't know that Frontiers was part of it.
Yeah. The way I got pitched to Frontiers was the French version of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I was like, I'm in.
Yeah.
I've actually never seen Frontiers. I'm kind of a...
Well, that's my pitch to you.
Because we just recently recorded with someone on Martyrs, and like, honestly, I've only seen maybe 3 French New Extremity films, and Frontiers is one that I keep hearing, and I'm like, I'm going to have to watch it at some point.
Yeah. I mean, do you try to stray away from them because of the gore, or...
the gore doesn't really bother me. I mean, you get listeners, you'll know this from our Martyrs episode that's coming out, but like, I don't like Martyrs, but like, I liked Inside. As problematic as it is, I liked High Tension. It's not really the gore, the like in your face stuff. It's more of some of the other things that make me
completely fair. Martyrs is it's one. It's fun, yeah. It's fun, yeah. You know, it's just like
fun is not what I would use to describe that movie.
It's funny I think when you mentioned that you were watching it, I was like, you'll have a good time. It's a fun ride. And all the comments were
you did in fact say that, yes.
All the comments were just like, well, I think we have two differences of fun. I was like, just wait. You'll have fun.
When it was, and I had seen it before. I've seen it once. This is the second time I had watched it, but it's not a Terry film. We'll just put it that way.
That is fair. It kind of reminds me of films, like a lot of films that I kind of stray away from are kind of bug films or insect films, like the movie Bug, for example, or Arachnophobia, or even Eight-Legged Freaks. Like, bugs don't necessarily scare me, except for grasshoppers, locusts, and crickets. I'm fucking terrified of all three of those. I have no idea why. Locusts, understandable, but grasshoppers and crickets, they're not going to hurt me. It's just the fact that they hop.
Crickets are annoying.
They are annoying. What is the feeling about sprickets?
Also not a fan.
Sprickets?
Oh, a spider cricket.
Yeah, it's a spider cricket.
Excuse me?
Yeah,
you've never heard of sprickets before? Of spider crickets?
They are
no, and I don't want to.
Terrible.
Do you not have them in the Midwest?
I don't even know what you're talking about. I'm afraid of going to look for it.
They're very close to face huggers. Yeah, they're
no.
They're nuts, and they hop really high.
No.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of hopping.
Spiders do not need to be jumping. They're terrifying enough as it is.
Yeah, I'm with you there,
That's
Terry.
all I'm going to say.
Very much with you there. But yeah, things like that. Like, there's that one movie that came out on Netflix that a lot of people also haven't talked about, which was God, I'm blanking on the name of it, but I want to say it was this lady who farmed locusts.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, to like eat them.
I forget what it's called, but I know what you're talking about.
She was doing it because the world was like losing its nutritional value in the 90s or some shit like that. And she falls, hit her head, they drink her blood, now they're vampire locusts. I'm just like, oh, wow, whoa. But that movie was a bit hard for me to get through, but hey. It's bugs. So yeah, bugs, not the biggest fan.
Yeah, I'm here with you, honestly. Okay, so it sounded like almost like your brother and some of your like family members introduced you to horror as a kid. Were you a scared kid watching horror movies, or did you kind of overcome that, or how did that process go?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I was pretty scared. Like, I would have like a bunch of nightmares, like quite frequently. I was also quite a sickly kid, like not sick to the point where I was hospitalized, but every summer I would always catch strep throat for some reason or hay fever. And when I would kind of be stuck in the house while all my family get to go out and play and do whatever they wanted to do, I would kind of explore whatever our cabinet would have. And surprisingly enough, my grandmother was like a closeted horror fan. And also, quick disclaimer, I have this Scream cereal box behind me. It actually does scream, so if it goes off while we're recording, my apologies. I have two of them, so like if any of them screamed, like that's just a quick little heads up on that.
That'd be amazing.
It is pretty cool. But yeah, so like my grandmother has like quite a bit of a collection. Like, she has like Valentine and things like that. So I would like just go through her cabinet and just watch DVDs while I was sick. I think that allowed me to overcome them a little bit more.
Okay.
Okay.
Because I would watch Valentine, When a Stranger Calls, which scared the shit out of me. Like, that one actually did
the
get
OG
me.
or the remake?
The OG, straight up from
so good.
Yeah, and then I didn't see the remake until it was on Lifetime.
So have you seen the original sequel, When a Stranger Calls Back?
I think I have, actually. Is that
it's
the
really
one where the
good
guy's like hiding and he's like in the brick wall?
Yep.
Yeah, that was cool. Yeah, I have seen that. Then, but it's interesting because when I would watch horror, I feel like I was supposed to be afraid, but at the same time, like I just found them closer to be cautionary tales. Like, for example, when I would watch People Under the Stairs, like that taught me to like not really fuck with people. Like, like don't go in people's houses that don't belong to you. Like, this is not your house. You didn't have permission to go in there. So like things like that. Like, it really taught me those life lessons to just like stick to your own shit and stick to your own guns and things like that. But it was, I feel like I was afraid in the beginning, and when I kind of overcame those nightmares, and now when I have nightmares, they're like full-length features for me. I'm just like, yo, I never seen that one. Like, so like
that's new.
Yeah, I was like, I haven't seen that yet. Which particular nightmare I actually wrote a feature film for because of it, but yeah, we can talk about that a little later.
That's exciting. So as an adult, it kind of sounds like you've kind of grown past like being afraid. Do you ever get scared watching movies, or are you pretty jaded like the rest of us?
Yeah, I feel like I am pretty jaded at this point. Like I'm quite desensitized to horror films. Like I know a lot of people, when they think of like the horror film that scared them the most, it's like Terrified or something like that, which makes sense. Terrified is scary, but
that one comes up a lot on this podcast.
Oh, does it? Yeah. So like, I feel like that's very given and understandable. But for me, the one that actually scared me recently was Swallow. And Swallow terrified me. I watched it at the peak, obviously, as everybody else. Like, we're all locked down with nothing else to do except watch horror films because we're getting ample content. It's nothing new for us. We're used to horror being VOD. So, like, we're just like, cool, we're living. But when Swallow came out, my wife was pregnant. And on top of her being pregnant, I was at the peak of, I have a mental eating disorder called phagophobia. And I was at the peak of that mental eating disorder. So what phagophobia is, just for those who don't know what phagophobia is, it's technically the fear of swallowing. I wasn't afraid to swallow. I was just more so I could not swallow when I would eat. And sometimes it would be while I would drink as well. Yeah, shit was terrifying.
Oh, that's not good.
So when I was at the peak of that, I watched that film, and even her eating like fucking Cheeto Puffs, that terrified me. I was just like, the way she was stuffing them in her mouth, I was just like I'm gonna be sick. Like I don't think I could finish this. It took me, I think, 2 tries to kind of get through Swallow. Wow. And
I can imagine.
Yeah, that one definitely got me for sure. And her just sticking anything in her mouth, I was just like, this sucks. Like that, it took me 45 minutes to just eat a slice of pizza today, and now I'm watching this lady eat a battery and a thumbtack. Like, wow, with like 0 water. She's just like, yep, going in. But
going ham.
So when I was at that moment, I challenged myself a little bit back in 2021 to rewatch it for a second time, and I was definitely nervous to rewatch it, and then when I rewatched it, it became one of my favorite movies of all time. And
it's so good.
It's so incredibly good. And like I completely gloat about it. And I wish I would have grabbed the copy from Second Sight, but I didn't, unfortunately. But it's something that I feel like is just a near and dear film to me now, and something that feels so cathartic for me now, because I was like, I overcame it, and like now that my phagophobia is now just triggers, I feel even, I guess, more closer to that film of just how like she overcame her relationship and her life even, and like I felt the exact same way with that, and her character just speaks so deeply to me, and it's fucking phenomenal. I really love Swallow, but Swallow was like the last film I think that really just like got under my skin.
That's a good choice.
That is a really good choice.
Thank you.
It's one of the last movies I saw before the pandemic, because saw that at the last festival that I've been to, physically been to.
Oh man.
And yeah, seeing that in the movie theater was squirm-inducing.
Oh, I bet. I would have loved to have seen it in theaters. Oh, that would have been amazing. Because the sound design in that is really also really intense.
Yeah.
Like her swallowing really is just like, oh, you really hear that? Oh, God. I'm just like picturing the mic just being like right in her face.
Oh, seriously. Like ASMR nightmare for sure.
God, it's fueling.
So you mentioned that Swallow has become kind of one of your favorite movies. What would you say are some of your favorite movies as an adult that are horror?
So my list kind of goes with I like sad shit. Like I am an emo kid at heart. So like sad shit is really what kind of gets me, and I have such a connection to it. Like I mean, I still listen to fucking Silverstein and shit like that still. So like I would say Doctor Sleep might be one of my favorite movies of all time. I absolutely love Doctor Sleep. And after Doctor Sleep, I would say probably Swallow. Swallow's up there. And The Night House is probably most recently like the one that really, really stuck with me. Get Out is another one as well. I love it so much. I'm rewatching it right now. It's so good.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your creative stuff before we move into the movie that you brought today.
Yeah.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about Nightlight, your horror movie podcast?
Yeah, of course. Nightlight was a passion project, like from start to finish. I thought about Nightlight back in 2018, and I was just like mumbling shit around and just like, I knew I really wanted a horror movie podcast. I had a kind of an entertainment podcast prior to that, called the Good Night Podcast. And with the Good Night Podcast, we like went through so many iterations. Like we started off kind of as a news podcast where we would just do breaking news. That wasn't valuable for the fact that if someone wanted to go back and start over, didn't make sense. So we transitioned into just a movie podcast where we just talked about film in general. The whole crew that I was on, except for one person, liked horror films. So for them, it didn't really make sense to kind of chat with horror about to them, because they were very much the generic kind of I wouldn't say movie watcher, but kind of the general audience, if you will, when it comes to horror. So they would use words like elevated horror or horror movies are bad and that's why they don't win Oscars and shit like that. So they were very much that type of crowd. So I pitched to them. I was like, hey, like I want to make a horror movie podcast specifically about horror, and that's it. And that's what I want to do. And we kind of went back and forth about it, and then I was going to launch it in like July of 2019 or something. And we had like a meeting, and the team was just like, no, we're not digging it. I feel like this podcast needs to do better first, and then we'll kind of get there. And I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then like it was just getting closer and closer, and I was just reworking the show so much to the point where I felt like I got it. And when I reworked the show, October was right around the corner, and I was like, fuck this, dude. Like October's here. Like I'm just going to release it, like whether they care or not. Like, I mean, it's technically my company anyway. So like, whatever, you know, fuck it. We're going to do this. So I did it. And it was kind of a practice round with Goodnight Podcast where we talked about the 13th Ghost and we rated our favorite ghost. And it was with all of us. Freddie and David are my two co-hosts for Nightlight, a horror movie podcast. And we were rating ghosts, and we were having such a good time. I was just like, the chemistry is fucking here. Like, this is the crew. Like, I found them. Like, this is it. And when we released the episode, which we started off with a deep cut, and a lot of people's called it silly for starting off with a deep cut. We started off with the House of the Devil. So like, yeah. So like we're hitting deep, and I was like, this is a podcast strictly for horror fans, and like I wanted to make that very clear by episode 1. Yeah, we talk about AAA titles and stuff. Like I want to say the next episode after that was like The Conjuring or some shit, but like we ended that month with Tigers Are Not Afraid. So like once again, like we just really kind of hunkered down and did that. But what the show pretty much consists of, it consists of us chatting about a specific horror film that's based off of a theme of whatever month it is. So, for example, a month that we're working right now is Mental Health Month or Mental Health Awareness Month, where we're actually going to be talking specifically about films on grief. That particular section is kind of something that we really try to promote as much as we possibly can, is what's happening within that month. So for March, we did Season of the Witch because it was spring equinox for Wicca. And like all that stuff that just kind of falls in line with whatever is happening in the month, we kind of try to match and mimic that. And they seem to be making a shit ton of crazy holidays during in the US, so it's just like whatever, we've got like unlimited content because it's just whatever that holiday is. So yeah, and gosh, 2 years later, we're here now. Back in 2020, we went along with Bloody Disgusting. We were brought onto their podcast network, which it still is like shocking. Like I pinch myself still. But yeah, all that from a tweet. That was it. All that from a tweet.
It's amazing what a single tweet can like spawn, because I mean that's kind of how this podcast came to be, was a single tweet and just spiral from there. So it's you know, you just gotta have that gumption and follow through with it.
Yeah. The internet could be cool sometimes. Like sometimes it could really work in our favors, and we could like see people doing cool shit and celebrate that, and that's really cool. Like it's really cool to like be able to celebrate other people's winnings.
Well, yeah, and I feel like that's like, things are so weird, I know, online about like horror, but I feel like I wouldn't know you guys, and I wouldn't have been able to find a lot of the opportunities online, like without these online relationships. You know what I mean? So like again, the internet is a terrible place, but also can be a not so terrible place. To put it in the most simplest of terms possible.
I dig it. No, like you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, because of the internet, it literally has allowed us to do so much shit. And off air, I'll chat with you a little bit more about the other projects I'm working on. But it definitely is all because of the internet, and without it, I don't know where I would be.
Yeah,
as weird as it to say.
But besides the podcast, you also mentioned screenwriting.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, I can. I can share a little bit. I can't share what movie it is, but what I can share is that it is a horror film.
Shocking.
Obviously. But it is...
That is going to be a romantic comedy.
I mean, I would be down. But it's an interesting process of writing a horror film that kind of came from a nightmare. And one thing that I can mention is that the horror film spawned from a tweet as well. That was, and yes, everyone can find that tweet if they really want to search for it, but it has something to do with Society, which was Brian Ustin's film from 1989.
I remember you tweeting about this. Yes,
so,
I
do. That film, or that project, I guess, is in the works for me right now. I can't share who's involved in it publicly yet, but yeah, that's what I'm working on.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's super exciting. Super exciting.
That's awesome. Well, Prince, what movie did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
Oh man, Bernard Rose's Candyman, 1992.
What was the name?
Candyman. What was the name? I'll say it 3 more times. Candyman.
Oh my god.
Candyman.
Where's a mirror? Where's a mirror?
I mean, Reflections on Your Computer works, right?
You're right. I mean, there's a whole Netflix show about the computer screen being a black mirror. So, here we go.
That is fair.
Here we go.
But so in Candyman, the Candyman, played by Tony Todd, a murderous soul with a hook for a hand, is accidentally summoned to reality by a skeptic grad student researching the monster's myth.
So, take us back. How old were you when you saw this? How did you see this? What about it scared you? Give us your horror story. We want to hear it all.
Oh, man. So, I was 6 years old when I first seen this movie.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah, that was a mistake. But
that was a choice.
Once again, older siblings, the whole nine.
Okay, I was going to ask if this was a you-directed choice or whether someone else.
Definitely the sibling and also cousin's choice. But I grew up in the hood in San Francisco, just to put it bluntly. And me growing up in San Francisco, and I grew up in a district called Bayview, Hunters Point. And growing up there, like, kind of everything what you saw in like the Chicagoan setting there was a little bit of what kind of it was for us, where you go to just a couple of miles down in the city and you're in the suburbs in San Francisco. And it's just a very weird ebb and flow that you kind of go from there. And what's even weirder is that Candyman 2021, Nia DaCosta's Candyman, represents my neighborhood still in some ways because of the gentrification now that's happening in my neighborhood. So with that, like, as kids, like, I never heard of Bloody Mary until I was maybe in middle school or high school. So I heard of Candyman first. So Candyman was my Bloody Mary.
That was your Bloody Mary.
Yeah. And we would dare each other. I went to a Catholic school, and our bathroom was in the basement. And yeah, it was the worst. I would hold it in all day. But with that, like, we would dare each other, and like I dare you to say Candyman 5 times in the basement, and that would just be our thing. And when we would all kind of like talk about Candyman and things like that, like, as a kid, I never saw the romantic aspect or the gothic aspect and things like that until I kind of, honestly, until I was probably in college is when I truly understood that, like, no, this film actually has such a different meaning than what I thought. Like, Candyman still is scary as fuck, but like, it's such a different meaning and such a different way to kind of showcase romanticism and honestly, to put it bluntly, jungle fever. Like, that was another thing that I found attractive in that film, is the fact that my family, they're obviously, we're all black, but at the same time, we have like family members who kind of have like mulatto descent, which is kind of a derogatory term for some people. It's just black and white. But with them having that kind of background and things like that, I've always been curious as to that side, because we have so much black pride in our family, but yet we have a lot of like mixed people in my family, and I've always was very curious about that. And when I took a DNA test, because I don't know my father, I took a DNA test, and I turns out that I'm like 30% Irish, and I was like, all right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, feeling lucky. But so it was definitely interesting for me to kind of see that in film. And
yeah,
I grew up with like hood movies, like, you know, like Don't Be a Menace to be one of those comedies, but like Menace to Society and Fresh and Boys in the Hood and things like that. Like, that's the type of films I grew up with. So seeing a film such as Candyman, it felt so representative for me until like later down the line I found out, I was like, whoa, this was like written by a white dude and directed by a white guy. And then you really started to see like, oh yeah, this was written by a white dude.
This was written by a white dude.
So what did 6-year-old Prince think of this?
Oh God, 6-year-old Prince. Do
you remember, like, was it like was it at nighttime? Did you just have like people come over and sit watch with you, or how? Do you remember any of that kind of stuff? I do,
actually. Yeah, it was nighttime, and I remember we made a lot of food, and it was just us just having a sleepover, and that was something that my family did quite often. Like, we would just have my cousins over, and we would just have a sleepover, and there was a lot of us. I want to say probably close to like maybe 8 or 9 of us.
Holy shit! Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so there was a lot of us watching this film, and they all knew that, since I was the youngest, they all knew that and like plotted against me and was just like, we're gonna fucking get him tonight. This is gonna be it. So like, when I was watching Candyman, God, like when we would go into the bathroom, they would cut the lights off, and it was just like shit like that. So like 6-Year-Old Prince hated this movie. I absolutely hated this movie. I wanted nothing to do with it after that. Like I would close my eyes a lot and I would close my ears. Like I was just like, I didn't want to do anything and have anything to do with this movie. And the part that really got me though was the fact that Candyman didn't give a shit about kids. And like when we hear that story from that kid, given that story of the kid in the bathroom, like, God damn, that's when I was just like, I'm not safe. Like, usually it's just like, oh, I'm a kid. No one's going to fuck with me. It's fine. I'm okay. But it's definitely something weird about it that just made 6-Year-Old Prince just feel like, I don't know, like scared to death.
Yeah.
I mean, that scene involving the kid that gets castrated is incredibly horrifying. Like,
seriously.
Rewatching it last night, I was like, oh, I completely forgot about that. And wait, did he just like imply that they had like cut off his, private parts and stuffed it down the toilet? Because I had to like rewind. I was like, wait a second. I did not hear that correctly.
Yeah, no, you heard it right. And it's insane. Like it's really scary to even think that, like to even have that as a as kind of a focal point in some ways too. Like it's just the fact that like nobody was safe in this neighborhood when they should have even been the enemy to begin with. Right.
And like, but also they have a little kid telling the story, which makes it even more fucked up. Because you have this little kid, like, because the whole movie is about people telling their stories about Candyman. And so everyone has a story. And this kid has one of the most upsetting stories. And he's like, can't be more than like, what, 8 or 9. And
and he's so hardened.
Yeah, and he just like is telling it just like, yep, this is just the way things are around here. And like fucking Helen is like, wow, fascinating. Wow.
Like more exploitation, please.
More, please.
Gimme.
Well,
Yeah,
and like, I mean, I really did hone in on it this time watching it because I watched it not too long ago, like a couple years ago. And I watched it when I was living in Chicago, and I was actually like doing research on Cabrini Green at an archive I was working at, which sounds like the whitest, most grad school student thing to say. I was studying archival footage of Cabrini Green. Like, Jesus Christ, that's embarrassing. But I had, I think, more context than I would have had watching it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I feel like it's interesting to watch it with a little bit more context about what Cabrini Green is as like an actual place in Chicago.
Seriously, though, like even thinking the fact that like this is a real place. And
I lived in the south side of Chicago and I lived there too. So I lived like not too far away. Yeah. So I lived not too far away. And so it was really interesting to see also how that part of Chicago has changed a lot since that movie was made. And like, how it's still the south side of Chicago, but also like it's another part of Chicago. And it's very different. It's very not as like scary as the movie would like to depict it, at least like when I like where I was around. So, but it was interesting to watch it after living in the south side of Chicago.
I bet, and I wish I could see it from that lens as well. Like I've always wanted to have like a horror film like that was like strictly set in San Francisco, but like my neighborhood, just so I could see like the comparisons and things like that. And I think the closest film we have to just being in my neighborhood in general is The Last Black Man in San Francisco. But like I definitely would love to see like a horror version of that, but.
Yeah.
Hey, we'll maybe get there. We'll see. Maybe the film I'm writing has something to do with it. I was going to
say, you can write it. But like, it was also really interesting this time around after being in academia for like a hot second, watching it about like really how invasive white people are in academic spaces about their research and how incredibly self-centered researchers are, because I've seen it firsthand. Like I saw it firsthand, like obviously not to this extreme, but like pretty similar. People being like, I'm going to go study these parts of the city that I'm a rich white person going to grad school, University of Chicago, but I'm going to like do these projects about these things. And it was fascinating to watch this movie about that in a way I hadn't like really kind of latched onto before. And that fetishization of the white academic gaze, to put it in the bougiest way possible.
I mean, I feels it though.
See, I have a very, I do too. As you know, here's the thing. I mean, and we'll talk about this later. I love this movie, even though there are aspects of it that are incredibly, incredibly problematic. But I think it's a really well-made movie. But I have a very vivid memory of seeing this for the first time.
Oh, wow.
So this movie came out in 92. It was during a time when I wasn't watching horror movies. I've talked about this on the podcast before. Like in the early to mid 90s, I wasn't really allowed to watch much horror, and so I retreated into books. So I did a lot of reading and didn't do a lot of movie watching. And I saw this, I can't remember if it was like my senior year of high school or maybe my freshman year of college I saw it for the first time. So we're talking like 98, 99. And one of the things that we would do as friends is we would get a bunch of movies, we'd go over to someone's house and we'd sit there and we'd watch a bunch of movies. Well, the night that we saw this movie, my friend Amy, she had her wisdom tooth taken out. I think all of her teeth taken out. And so we went over to her house to sort of like cheer her up and be there with her.
Yeah.
And we brought a bunch of movies. And this was, I think, I think this might have been the last movie. I don't think it was supposed to be the last movie. It was the last movie we watched. And she was like at this point kind of drugged out on the chair. It was like I think like 3 or 4 of us like crouched into her very small living room. She was in her father's like lazy boy recliner with blankets and everything, just really cozy. I think she had fallen asleep. And then we get to the point of the movie after Candyman shows himself and Helen wakes up in a pool of blood in McCoy's is it Anne-Marie? Is that her name?
Yeah.
Yep.
Anne-Marie's bathroom. And there's blood. And then she opens the door. And that is when Amy woke up. And she just let out the most blood-curdling scream because there's a decapitated dog head on the floor. And she just like screamed. The entire, all of us just like jumped in our chair and started screaming too. So there's like us, like a bunch of like 17 to 18-year-olds just like screaming. And we're like, what's going on? Because it's like you enter this nightmare. Up until this point, it's really restrained, and then you get into this fucking nightmare, and it's just like, what is even happening right now?
And the room's blood-soaked.
Yeah, oh my god! And I forgot. I totally forgot about the part where Helen has like a wild like break where she just dissociates and murders a dog, and I was like, wait, what is happening? What? Totally forgot about that.
And that is when my friend, poor Amy, who, by the way, is not a horror fan.
Oh, no.
And after this movie, I don't think has let me really introduce her to horror ever again. We're still friends, like on, I don't know if she listened to the podcast, but hi, Amy. But yeah, when she woke up and all she saw was this head of a dog. And again, remember that this was back in the VHS days. This tape had probably been run through a million different VHS players. And so it was a crappy quality. It looked dangerous because it's like, it looks like something that you shouldn't be seeing.
Yeah, almost.
And then that is what you're presented is this fucking head. And she lost it.
Poor Amy.
Wow.
I know, poor Amy. I feel so bad about it when I was watching this movie and it was like that memory came back and it's like, oh.
So did you know
Amy.
it was a horror film at the time you were watching it? Like y'all
Yeah.
knew? Okay. All right. For sure.
We knew. She like would let us watch horror movies. She'd be like okay with it, but yeah, it wasn't so much after this movie. This movie kind of broke her.
Amy's like, fuck y'all, I'm never doing this again.
I was kind of a jerk afterwards too, because I remember going into friends' bathrooms with them and going, Candyman.
Oh,
fuck you! You're the fucking worst.
Movie.
I hated people like that. You guys scared the shit out of me.
Oh man,
I knew I would do that years later with The Ring. It was like that's just 7 days.
Damn, you're
like that was just
amazing. I kind of did the same thing, but to strangers. I went to go see The Night House in theaters, and it's just super late showing, like maybe 10 o'clock at night or something like that. But at the same time, Candyman 2021 came out. So in the bathroom, they let out at the same time. I'm in the bathroom, and these guys are like fucking around and just joking, and they're just like, yeah, should we say Candyman in the mirror? And I'm just like, yeah, y'all should say it. And they weren't saying it. They kind of like all just like, nah, I'm just kidding. Like these are like maybe 40-year-old men who are just like joking about saying it to their kid and things like that. So I say it 5 times extremely fast, and I walk out and I turn off the lights. And
oh my God.
This is in a public bathroom.
Wow.
Yes.
And you just hear like poor kids. They're just, but hey, you're taking your kids to the movie and see this movie. So hey.
But I also want to talk about the scene right before Helen wakes up in a puddle of blood, which is when we first see Candyman, right? Like,
yes.
This is it's 45 minutes in the movie, so we've already been kind of talking about Candyman. Some shit has been going on, and then all of a sudden, the tone shifts because you hear Tony Todd saying Helen in the most bone-chilling way.
So good.
It's so good. Like, I forgot how incredible Tony Todd is as Candyman. Just like the charisma and like the dread, and it's like scary but also like really kind of sultry at the same time. Yeah,
that's the thing. Like, it's just it's an attraction to it, and it's so weird because you're just like, this guy's attractive. Like, he's tall, he's dark, he's handsome, and he's so on top of that, he's fly as fuck. Like he's just like
the speeches. You're like, yeah. I don't know what you're saying, but it sounds really pretty. And like, but also just like the way they warp his voice to be so just menacing, and it's also scary because you know how. Like, it's in a parking garage. It's in, like, a place where, you know, people are nervous in parking garages, too. You know what I mean? Right. And there's, like, narratives of white women being scared of going to their cars and things like that. So, and that's another, like, weird part of this movie where I'm like, did they mean to do that? Or was that just, like, a weirdly unconscious white person writing a movie?
I think they meant to do that for sure. Because, like, we it's not the first time we get that in this movie, right? It's true. Just, like, we have her going into the bad part of the neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
Where she goes to Cabrini Green, and it's just, like, like, the whole thing in my head when I watch it now is just, like, oh, look at the white woman who's in this dangerous setting. And it's things like that where it's just, like, and then we have Bernadette, who has I guess she brings up the fact that they know I'm going to be different and all this whole other stuff and things like that. When, I mean, black people know how to code switch. It's a thing. Like, it's just like, it's a thing for survival and all this whole other stuff, even though like we're not really trying to survive for it. It just happens.
Well, and you also see that at the dinner when it's like all of the professors and then it's just Bernadette as the only black person at the table, and you can tell she's trying really hard, like, because Helen is so fiery, because Helen has that privilege of being being aggressive and like being able to argue, and Bernadette's so quiet and kind
she's like, don't ruin this chance for me, white woman, is basically what she's saying. She's like, stop, Helen. Like, she doesn't want this one person to like ruin everything that she has tried to get out of life, and it's kind of a heartbreaking scene.
It really is,
honestly.
It really is, and even us seeing this, like, that's where we kind of even hear the history of Daniel Robitaille, even though they never even say his name in the first Candyman.
No, he's just Candyman.
Oh, that's Candyman. Right.
Yeah, they never say Daniel Robitaille. We don't hear Daniel Robitaille until Farewell of the Flesh. But it's interesting when we kind of see that in things like that, and that's something that I've mentioned multiple times, where it's just like, this is a film that was created to not have a sequel. Like, it was just like Bernard Rose was like, oh, cool, I made it, I'm done. Like, you know, I don't want to make a second one. And when this was created that particular way, it was it was interesting that he never mentioned his name or never wanted to mention his name and things like that. And now we have these battle cries and rallies and things like that, like, say their name, like that's such a focal point, and it always has been for Black history in general. And for Black folk is the usage of our name. And that's something that we hold so near and dear to us, which is kind of weird to say, but it kind of goes back to Roots, where in Roots, where Kunta Kinte was trying to keep his name and they were trying to change his name to Toby, and he got whipped to the point until he had to say Toby. And that whole concept is something that we all hold near and dear to us. Like, my name being Prince, for example, I got picked on like crazy, and I wanted to abandon my name as a kid. So I called myself Mo, and that's what my whole family would call me. They would all call me Mo, and I didn't use Prince until I was in college. That was at that point in time when I was at age 18, I was like, I think I'm going to use my actual name and really just like empower that and take hold of that and things like that. And even then, like, there's incidents where people would still try to call me different names. You're just like, I'm not going to call you Prince. Like, what? That's weird. Like, you know, like, I was like, but that's my name. So like,
yeah.
So, but like, it's things like that have always just been so close to Black people as their name. And I've always found that to just be such a shitty move in Candyman, where just like, you can't even say this person's name, yet you have all this history on him, yet you don't know his name. Like, you're saying all this history of he used to be, he was a free slave who was actually a really amazing artist, and his dad made all these shoes for World War I or whatever, for the Civil War or whatever, and he made this super magic shoe machine, and yet you're not saying his real name. You're still calling him Candyman.
He's like still not a person. He's like not a person to them.
Right.
Like, despite the fact that they have like a pretty detailed history of who this person was, they don't say the name because he's still a legend and like fake in a way to them. So giving him a name makes it a real tragedy rather than just a tall tale, which I think that Nia DaCosta's Candyman, I think, does a better job trying to unpack. I don't always know if it's as successful, but I think there's more that her movie is trying to do in terms of like unpacking that kind of thing. And rather than this one, it's more like, let's give from the very white perspective of like seeing this as a phenomenon rather than as like an actual tragedy that has happened and like is indicative of centuries of violence.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think that is the problem with this movie inherently, is that I think Bernard Rose was latching on to, you even mentioned it, Prince, earlier, the Gothic. This is a Gothic romance. Right. Like, this is a Gothic romance set in an urban environment. And so if you were to divorce like the race aspect to it, it is a fairly traditional Gothic story. But the problem is that you can't divorce that, because this story, even if you were to look at it, this story is pulled from a real life event. Yeah. I don't know if you guys have seen the Chicago Reader article. They came in through the bathroom mirror. Yeah. About Ruthie Mae McCoy, who again is two people's names in this movie. You have Anna Marie McCoy, and then you also have Ruthie, the person that the janitorial staff brings up that was murdered. And so Ruthie lived in Chicago in the, I believe it's the ABLA project. It's the Chicago Housing Authority project known as ABLA. It was a high rise. I mean, we're hearing similarities here already. A high rise that had dark, malfunctioning elevators, pitch black stairwells, and addiction and violence was prevalent. And that's what is being represented in this movie. Yeah. And this woman, Ruthie Mae McCoy, was calling the police because she was saying that some people are next door and they want to come in through the bathroom. And the police were like, what? And so they didn't send anyone immediately. And it wasn't until someone else called in and saying that they heard gunshots that finally the police arrived, but no one didn't answer. No one knocked on the door. They knocked on the door and no one answered. So they didn't barge in. They didn't do anything. And so the next day later, another neighbor calls and says, hey, I haven't seen Ruthie, and she normally comes by, and still the police didn't do anything. They didn't want to break down the door. And it wasn't until the following day that one of the project managers came in with a carpenter and drilled through the lock and found her dead. And they had literally come in, again, like this movie, through the bathroom, the medicine cabinet in the bathroom that was connecting between the two buildings.
Yeah.
And so you hear the story and you hear about how, like, and the article is very, very long. We'll include it in the show notes, listeners, if you haven't read it, but it's very in depth about that whole area, as well as her story, her tragic story in the middle of it. And it's, so basically he literally pulled from this into this movie. And so it's kind of hard to just take it as like, oh, he's trying to make a Gothic romance story when there's so much real life trauma that is the cornerstone of him making this movie.
Right. And that whole aspect of him kind of taking real life events and things like that into it, like for him, he was thinking like, I'm being authentic. Like, you know, I am showing a very authentic story and giving this legend aspect to it to really paint something beautiful. And granted, I love Candyman, don't get me wrong, but yeah, this movie has its faults, and Bernard Rose has his faults as well. And it's it's really telling, because if we even think about the original story of The Forbidden by Clive Barker, like when we think about that, like it was all based on class. Like it had nothing to do with who's black, who's white. I want to say even his version of Candyman was a redhead. So like it was pretty much. Clive Barker's version was a horror movie of Titanic. Like we have Rose and Jack, and it was the same shit. But like when we get this version for Bernard Rose's Candyman, he did create something beautiful, but it was so hurtful to the point where it took us 20 years 30 years to kind of regain that back and reclaim that. Because if we even think of all the sequels, not a black director for any of the sequels, not a black writer for any of the sequels.
Well, aren't they all still centered on like the white woman being like taken by peril. Candyman, like the white woman in peril becoming pretty much all of them are the rehash of King Kong, and they're all just different versions of King Kong, and it's exactly where you have this white savior and things like that, and it's so interesting to kind of see how you have Candyman be retold in Nia DaCosta's Candyman. I think that's why I love it so much, Nia DaCosta's Candyman, because of the fact that she has this retelling of how we are able to bring this figure back to us as a black community, and how it was a tale that was forgotten, and you have to remember it to do all of this whole other stuff. And with Daniel Robitaille telling, sorry for quick spoilers, not really a big spoiler, but tell everyone, and how Daniel Robitaille says that motion of like, let everybody know that this shit still happens, like, and like it's even the story of like cops taking too long, or not taking a situation serious in a certain neighborhood, or even over policing in those certain neighborhoods and things like that. Like it's those types of situations that kind of go hand in hand, because there'll be gunshots in my neighborhood one night and no cop cars, like none. And it's just like, it's such a norm that like you don't hear sirens when there's gunshots or anything. Unless it's like a full-blown war or something going on up there, and it's crazy. It's really crazy to think about that type of stuff, that this is such a norm. And anytime cops will call, I never like leave my number, because it's just like, you're not gonna really take me that seriously. So like, this is what the situation is. Get here if you can. Like, you know, there's an incident with one of my neighbors who got into a fight with her daughter, and the cops were called, I want to say around like 4 p.m. or something like that. The cops didn't show up until 9:30 p.m. Yeah. The fight already was like done. I was gonna say, like, everyone's like gone to bed at that point. Like everyone's left. Like there's nothing left to talk about.
Like it was just like what are you even here for? It's just,
do you still live in San Francisco?
Nothing. I do, yeah. I actually still live in the same neighborhood that I grew up in. I just live in a different part of that neighborhood.
Cool.
So it's like I've seen this neighborhood like start from like the bottom to like where it is now, and it still has work to do in some ways, I guess. But like at the same time, like gentrification's like real, and it's crazy to see like high rises in my house or by my house, and things like that, where I'm just like, that is nuts. But yeah, San Francisco's still home. I used to live in a small town called Fresno, which it's a town, but I used to live there, and I went to high school there in Fresno, and I went to a medical high school in Fresno. So like, that's an interesting fact about me / tidbit. I went to a medical high school, and I used to I used to work on cadavers, and I actually interned at a coroner's office.
Holy cow!
Yep.
I was studying to be a mortician.
Oh wow! Yeah! Oh my god, that's so cool.
Yeah, I studied mortuary science for 3 years, and that was that was it kind of died out at a certain point because it was just like it actually surprisingly expensive to get into mortuary work.
I researched it for a long time because when I was in grad school, I decided I didn't want to be in academia and I was going to become a mortician. And
have either of you read Smoke Gets in Your Eyes?
No, I haven't.
Yes, the one about being a mortician or like growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, okay, but it's like hours of research, so many expensive classes and like licensing and lab hours. I'm like, fuck, this is going to take forever.
Yeah, I got a leg up on it when I was in high school, but like it was.
Did you learn how to do all the makeup and stuff and like reconstruct faces and shit?
Yes, so we learned how to do that. That was my sophomore year in high school, where we had to learn how to do makeup, and we had to learn how to dress a dead body as well. That was interesting.
Oh my god!
There's like these little things that you would kind of hook the body on, and you would dress them. And like if it's like a kid, for example, like you would paint their nails and all that stuff. Like it's
wild.
It's nuts. And yeah, we had to take pictures of our work and all that stuff. And,
oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
It was interesting. No. It was a very weird high school, but it was McLean Medical Academy, if anyone's interested. I have no idea if they still have that mortuary program, but it was cool. It was cool.
That's really fucking cool.
Yeah, it was
weird. High school, weird, but cool. But like, oh. All right.
Yeah, like there was a whole bunch of things. Like we had like a ton of people watching us, like a ton of professionals had to be there. But I mainly studied because we had to write a thesis, and my thesis was actually on like asthma and sleep apnea, more so like sleep paralysis and stuff like that. Like I always was just super fascinated about that stuff. So you had to have these major tangents. Sorry, like you had to have these like actually set up like real life like experiments and things like that. So I would literally go and ask people and like based off of the budget of the school, we would pay them, and I would be like, hey, like, you know, have you guys seen Come True?
Yeah.
Yeah, it very similar to that. Like you would just literally have like flyers up, someone pick it, and then they would meet you at the school.
You were a high school student doing that shit?
Yeah, I was high school.
Nuts.
Yeah.
That's wild.
My thesis was on asthma, and it was like a crazy like 60 to 75 page paper just about like asthma and the development of asthma. And we actually found out at that point in time that based off of that, and it's published in the Fresno Bee, but it was the fact that Fresno is a bowl between San Francisco and LA because it's so flat. And LA has hills and San Francisco has hills, so all the smog just sits on top of Fresno.
Oh no.
So that's why Fresno has one of the worst asthma problems in California.
Wow. I suffer from asthma, so like that's
same.
not where I should live.
Definitely not. So same here. I'm 100% allergic to Fresno.
Yeah, I think I am too.
So like you definitely don't want to go there, but it was pretty neat to like do all that other stuff and things like that, but I didn't pursue
that's
it.
Wild.
I pursued graphic design. I was like, yeah, I want to do it. It's cheaper, you know. It was cheaper. I got a full ride, and I was like, yeah, whatever. We'll do graphic design instead. And I actually ended up liking that a little bit more. But yeah, and it's a lot of work. Like mortician work is a lot of work. Like plus you have to live there. Like it's just you got no choice.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to, but like it's easier if it's just in your basement or whatever. But yeah. Anyway, Candyman.
Speaking of the insides of people, though, the reveal where Candyman pulls open his coat and this is like a rib cage and it's just like swarming with bees, just iconic. And I can't remember how many times, but like I know he got stung like a lot of times filming this.
27 times.
Yeah, and I was watching this on Amazon, and you have like the little X-ray with like the facts and stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a picture of a really cool fact because I'm a nerd here, but the bees were bred specifically for this movie. They needed to make sure that the bees were only 12 hours old so that they looked like mature bees, but their stinger wouldn't be powerful enough to do real damage. So they bred bees specifically for this movie. So yeah, isn't that like fucking crazy?
Yeah.
It's wild.
I follow a bee farmer on TikTok. And,
I love bee farmers on TikTok.
She's fantastic. But like, I was thinking about it, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I assume this is true, that they had to have the queen somewhere on the chest cavity because the way that they swarm over there, it wouldn't have worked. And also, when the queen is around, they're a lot more docile.
Yeah.
So they won't be as quick to sting you unless you're just like, you pose a danger pretty much. So I believe he was stung 27 times in his contract. I think it was like $1,000 a sting or something like that.
I'm gonna be honest though, 27 times is not as much as I would have thought.
No,
it's
honestly,
still bad and terrible. But
I wouldn't want to be stung once.
No,
however,
exactly. Like, still terrible, but less than you would have thought, because he was probably covered in bees a lot.
Yeah, same thing with Helen, and that was that, and you guys heard of that strange ordeal that Bernard Rose supposedly got her hypnotized to do those scenes. So like the actual hypnotism scenes of when like she's in a trance, supposedly she was actually hypnotized for those scenes. And
really,
same thing goes for the bees and things like that. Like supposedly she was not cool with the whole bee situation, but Bernard Rose really wanted that kiss with the bees going from one mouth to another mouth to exchange.
I mean, it is pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. It is pretty cool, but it's just like,
Well, and like speaking of the bee kiss, I thinking about some of the imagery, but also some of the dialogue that is so Clive Barker and like reminds me of Hellraiser, and the way that Candyman speaks. He's just like, "What is blood if not for shedding? The pain I can assure you will be exquisite." Like, it's just so Clive Barker, and I love it so
it really is
much. And he's just,
and Tony Todd was meant to say Clive Barker lines. Like the way he says these lines is just like, it's so lyrical, and it's so like exactly like I would imagine Clive Barker writing it. It's just, it's like, it's perfect.
Seriously.
It's ASMR.
Well,
it's Tony Todd ASMR.
Well, and
yes, I can listen to it over and over.
This was his like his Phantom of the Opera, he described it. Like, this was like his big moment. And I mean, he fucking chewed up every second of it. Speaking of nails, did not notice on this until this watch that the hook is nailed into his arm, and you can see some of the nails poking out of it. I had never noticed that before.
Me neither.
Oh.
Yeah.
I think this is only the third time I've seen this movie. And again, the first time was, again, the VHS crappy copy, so it's like you can't really make out anything on that.
Yeah, I mean, when you see the nails like kind of into his stub and things like that, and even in the second one, like they show the whole process. Like, it is like,
oh really,
brutal. Oh
so
yeah,
I haven't seen the sequels.
I haven't seen any of the sequels except for Nia DaCosta's Candyman.
So it's very reminiscent to when Anthony gets the hook in his nub. It's very reminiscent of that, but it's like a bunch of people holding him down, and they jam it in, and they're like nailing, and then it's not just like regular nails, it's like train spikes. Like, it's just, fun fact about that as well, the railroad ghost in 13 Ghosts was actually modeled after Candyman. So that's why he has a hammer in his arm, and his is also nailed in. So
okay.
He was modeled after Candyman. Yeah,
that does make sense.
Fun fact about that too.
Before we talk about Nia DaCosta's Candyman, because I want to touch on that, I just want to take a shout out to the Philip Glass score in this movie.
Okay, I was going to go there.
I just want to talk about it because just da-da-da-da-da. It's like, so if you're not sure that this is a gothic movie, just listen to that score and you know that this is like some gothic romance shit. Like, it's
amazing.
It's so good.
It is so good.
Philip Glass is one of my favorite composers. I love his work, and he is known for making like arpeggios and for like doing a lot of like simplistic.
What's an arpeggio?
Arpeggios where it's like like that kind of stuff. He does a lot of arpeggios. He does a lot of like simplistic like melodies that sort of repeat and refine themselves and like kind of grow over time, where it, like, it layers in that kind of emotion. And this is like a pitch perfect score for him. This one, and honestly, he composed The Hours, which again is another movie that the score is just phenomenal. And I used to play that I used to play The Hours like soundtrack on my piano all the time, because I just, his music translates.
Tell me you're depressed without telling me you're depressed. I played the Hours soundtrack on the piano for hours
like,
by myself.
No.
I used to do it all the time because his music is like it's not too difficult to learn, especially because I think he is like very piano forward, and so it's not too difficult to learn on the piano, and it's just a bunch, like, again, repeating patterns. So once you've like learned it, it's really easy to do, but it has such an elegance to it, and like you said, Mary Beth, this is gothic. This is a gothic score to its core, and I love it so much.
Yeah.
I love this score. I think the score is perfect.
The score generally is what makes the film in some ways, because I feel like Philip Glass just really understood that he understood the gothic romance behind it, and he understood that like each scene needed to have this kind of operatic feel to it, where it's almost Shakespearean in some ways, and it's the way that we kind of see that clarification through his composition, and it's incredible. And I'm blanking out on the one for Nia DaCosta, but I'm gonna find that composer as well, because I feel like they also did an amazing
I like
job.
that composer a lot.
The composer of the new one definitely understood what Philip Glass's score was about, and I think in a lot of way, and I think we'll probably talk about this a little bit, I think that it is a perfect like mirror image to what Philip Glass was doing. I still think Philip Glass's score is better, but again, you're like comparing like this pitch perfect, in my opinion, score, and it's hard to like match that. But I think that what the composer for 2021's Candyman was doing definitely feels like he understood what Philip Glass was doing.
Yeah,
absolutely. And his name is Lynchins. He goes under Lynchins, but it's Robert A. Lowe, Robert Aki Aubrey Lowe.
Cool.
But he goes by Lynchins, and yeah, I mean, he genuinely, I feel like he definitely understood it. And one thing that I really like is that I believe Philip Glass's Candyman theme song was called Candyman's Box, if I'm not mistaken, and it's to sound kind of like a music box in some ways. With his, it's called Troy's Story, and it's such an interesting like overtone because they're both Candyman, and it's just like, god damn it, like it's just I can literally talk about both of these movies all damn day.
Well, let's before we wrap up, let's briefly talk about Nia DaCosta's, because one thing that like, again, I've seen that this is the third time I've watched this movie, and I have Nia DaCosta's Candyman so close in my memory, having watched it a few times over the last like 6 months or so. But the way that the movies kind of complement each other is really fascinating. Like, especially with the opening of Bernard Rose's Candyman, where it's a top-down look at the city, and it's almost like you're looking down on the city.
Right.
Whereas Nia DaCosta opens her movie with like the city upside down, and it's like a mirror image, except you were like mid-level and you're part of the city as opposed to like above it looking down on Cabrini Green. You're in it, and it's almost as if you've gone through the mirror and you're on the opposite side, and it's like a reflection of it. And the way that this movie, I think 2021's Candyman plays with sort of like mirror images, makes you feel like what you're seeing is one side of that mirror, and now we're going to take you into the real part of it. It's like a reflection, and this is the real shit. And that's one thing that I really appreciated more so on this watch.
I agree. And I even love to point out that they really honed in on the painter aspect about it. And that whole concept of the whole thing was just about art. And that being Daniel Robitaille's like thing, like he was like his forte, like he was comfortable around art, and that was his main thing. And in some ways love as well, where Anthony kind of had this major confliction of like art, obsession, love, and it's just, it was all these different classifications that I felt like set him up to be the perfect Candyman. And I think a lot of people who didn't like that movie or whatever compared it a little too much to the original, when I was just like, it feels to me to be just the perfect sequel to this, and especially one 30 years later, because when we have Anthony being the young boy who was supposed to get sacrificed, and him kind of in a way having Candyman's mark, like he's, I don't know, Dracula, right? Like, I mean, it's just like he was sired to Candyman, and he had this particular connection with him. I still get confused with Coleman Domingo's character at times where I'm just like, why is he obsessed? Like, you know, like I get it, like he met Candyman first or whatever when he was a kid, but it was just like, I think his name was William in the movie, but William Burke, yeah. And I was just like, oh, why? Like, you know, like, why though? Like, why is he like, you've seen Candyman kill your sister, and like, yet you have this kind of feeling of just like, I need to get you to be Candyman.
Yeah, and like that's one of the things I think with Nia DaCosta's Candyman. I think that there's just so much happening in the movie that I think is all important.
Not long enough.
It's not exactly. It's not long enough. I just think there's so much cool stuff going on that she doesn't have time to unpack fully. So it feels like a lot of like kind of threads that aren't totally resolved. But at the same time, like, what am I trying to say? At the same time, it's just like also the fact that this came out in movie theaters in 2021 is fucking incredible. And like just the fact that this movie was made by a Black woman about like from a Black perspective about Black people as like, as I said, a perfect sequel to the from 30 years ago. It just like, it is the perfect sequel. Like despite the things that might not be perfect about it, it's still like an incredible way to continue the series. I want more Brianna Cartwright.
Oh my god, me too. And
Tiana Paris is so good in that movie. She's so good. Like
I could see her do anything now, and I'm just like, I had so much more of an appreciation of her character in WandaVision after watching it as well. I'm just like, dude, you're amazing. But like with the complaints that I normally hear is that it was too woke or whatever, and Nia DaCosta very much blatantly says what this movie is in the movie. When Anthony is showing the painting to Bree, and when he shows it to Bree and she's just like, it doesn't really leave room for interpretation, it's just all out there. That's the fucking movie. Like, the movie's just all out there. Like, there is no interpretation. Like, this is what you're going to see, and this is what she wanted to show. And she wanted to show a completely unfiltered version of what her Candyman was to her in general. And I felt like the usage of the mirrors and things like that was a really good touch as well. And the only time we were able to see Candyman, I guess, not in a mirror in this moment was when he was faced with his one true love, which was Bree. And like, that's the main time we didn't have to see him inside of a mirror. And
holy shit, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, like, and I love the fact that like we do have that opportunity to really, I guess, truly understand what makes a Candyman. Like, sure, we got Daniel Robitaille's story, which was absolutely horrendous, but the fact that, like, there are multiple people who are wronged and turned into legends, like, gosh, everything that was going on, like, and still going on with police brutality and things like that, and, like, these are people who are now turned into legends, like Breonna Taylor, or, fucking everybody, like, you know, like it's just like like I even like don't even want to like say it all, but like everybody, and it's absolutely horrendous how we are able to see those people become like a tall tale in some ways, and that utilization of, and the fact that like during the marketing, and I'm sure y'all probably remember this, but during the marketing, it was say his name for a long time.
I wrote that a lot when I was writing articles about it.
Right.
Like, say his name. Like, that was the marketing, but it was really good.
It was great.
Or say her name.
Right.
Because a lot of people didn't want to say it was Nia DaCosta's, Candyman.
That's very true. And like a lot of that really played in a lot to the fact that like of how aware they are of like their surroundings, and I feel like they knew they had something special. And I guarantee if people give this movie 10 years and revisit it in 10 years, I guarantee some people are going to feel like it is a fucking masterpiece and can stand right next to Bernard Rose's Candyman.
Well, also, I people like it's too woke. I'm like, did you see the first one though? Like, it's not
like
subtle either.
On,
like, that one's not
like, seriously.
Like, it's like maybe a little bit subtler than Nia DaCosta's, but not by much. Like, it's pretty fucking obvious.
Much. Like we have that police story to open up the movie in Candyman 1992.
Well,
like,
I guess we aren't just like understanding how to watch movies, but then also I just thought about this, about how Nia DaCosta getting erased a little like getting erased by a lot of people with this movie kind of is very interesting how Brie has a similar situation of trying to be an artist and make a name for herself and divorce herself from things. And Nia DaCosta went through a very similar thing with her own movie. And I hadn't really thought about that parallel until just now, but it's fascinating. It's like, oh, wow, see, like it's a movie, but it's really not that different from how like this whole marketing and people are talking about it is going down.
Seriously. And the way that I feel like she evokes fear in that film as well just really is a very understandable way. Because to me, like, and a lot of people have gripes with the bathroom scene, for example. I personally love the bathroom scene. I think it's a fantastic callback to when we have Helen in the bathroom and she gets beat up and she gets mugged. I think that's a great callback to that. But
quick side note, Helen gets her ass kicked so hard in this movie, and I forgot how much she gets her ass kicked. Like, I love a movie that just will kick her ass. Like, everyone, like, who cares that she's like a white lady? Like, let's just, I'm like, good for, like, you know what? At least you have her getting her like ass beat by people.
Right.
Like, I don't know. I just like kind of appreciate that in a movie that doesn't treat her so delicately. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, because they definitely they whoop her ass for sure, and it's just like, woo, time passed. But with that particular bathroom scene in Nia DaCosta's Candyman, like a lot of people feel like they was just there for scare sakes, and by a lot of people, I'm mainly talking about the general audience, but like when that particular bathroom scene is just like, no, like
you're talking about the teens in the bathroom, right?
Yeah, the teens in the bathroom, and I was like, that, like to me that rings so true because like everything is just a whisper on the wall, right? I mean,
well, I think it's one of the more important scenes in the movie. I mean,
agree.
It's divorced from the story that's happening, but it's one of the most important things because it is again harking back to the idea of white people taking on a black mythology and not understanding what's going on, and then basically kind of saying like, I'm just going to say it, and not understanding the truth behind it. And so for me, it is like the most important scene of that movie because it's the linchpin for what I think the themes that she is trying to explore in this film.
Absolutely. And it has just such a way to just bring so much gravitas to how it travels and how just a little bit of a very minor whisper of something may travel positively or negatively, right? Like, I mean, we see it all the time on Twitter, right? We see people disagreeing, we see people agreeing, we see people piling, we see crowds forming, we see the whole shit, and we see the commentaries in the films we watch in real life. And with those particular commentaries and those metaphors that we see, it all spans on the back to what we know is life. Like, this is just life. Like, whether we paint it inside of a horrific picture or if we paint it inside of a beautiful light, it doesn't matter. All of it's still going to represent what we know, which is life. Like, it's just the Star Wars, for example. It's literally the hero's journey. Like, it's just like, it's life, dude. Like, it's just like it's a guy getting a fucking job interview. Relax. Like, you know, like it's just it's things like that just feel like it's so true, and it's so telling to what we care about in life and how much we actually care about the things that we love and how true it reigns to how close it is for home for us as well. So, I mean, kudos to Nia.
Before we do wrap up, one of the things that like I started thinking about on this rewatch is the way that urban legends have kind of like pulled from like folklore, where it was like folklore was like at one point the stories that you would hear, and then it became urban legends, and then in like in the 2000s it became creepypastas. Like, I'm just like, the idea of that it's where you're living at that time is where like the kind of folk lore and the folk horror kind of pulls from. And I'm just wondering, like, what's it going to be in like 20 years where it's like, what's the next thing that is going to be haunted by Slenderman or Candyman or Bloody Mary or, elves in the woods or, leprechauns or whatever the case may be. It's like, what's going to be the next iteration? It's just, I started thinking about that as they were, discussing the idea of an urban legend.
Yeah. And I feel like a few folks are definitely trying to do new things. Like, I'm not too sure if you have seen those apps that like make up fake text message stories. Have you guys heard of those? Yeah, like it's I don't know what the app is called, but like it pretty much is an app that makes up fake text message stories where you communicate through the text message and they send you a message back, and it's a back and forth, but it's a horror story. So it could be like someone's in your house or something like that. Like it's things like that. So or you can just have it play out a scenario for you where it's just you're just reading the text messages of a past thing. Really cool things that have done that have been Her Story. Have you guys heard of that?
Oh, mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Her Story and Telling Lies. Exactly. Sarah is Missing is a good
Sarah's
app.
Missing. Yes. All of those are I feel like it's definitely going to be the new way we consume these new particular legends of what we're kind of familiar with, because technology kind of holds us in a chokehold. So I feel like it's just going to get more and more of that in storytellings of that. So, which I'm excited for.
I think TikTok also is playing a big role, and YouTube as well. Because like if you think about shorts, like, well, when I was growing up on like early days of YouTube, like Marble Hornets, and that was, we talked, like you mentioned Slender Man and like things like that. And then you have TikTok videos like making things like the back rooms and things like that, like capturing kind of these liminal spaces. So it's interesting to see how like, well, and that I was thinking about that a lot because like Candyman originated in the movie, correct? Like Candyman was not a thing outside it before the movie. And it became part, like it's a fictional thing, but also it's a fictional thing based upon trauma and tragedy in a way. And like people don't,
right.
It's just interesting how this legend becomes a thing, and then other legends that are based on tragedies become like kind of detached from the actual real life tragedy and more into like these paranormal aspects of it. And it's fascinating, and like similar with Slender Man in terms of how that leaked into reality and how like young girls killed because of that. And I just think it's so interesting about how these kinds of things morph into their own lives of their own. Like Candyman is completely fictional, but people still think if you say it in the mirror today, like he'll come and get you. And it's like Bloody Mary, but still like it's just wild how those things like proliferate. And like I knew about Candyman before I knew about the movie, like as a kid. So it's just fascinating how those things spread and become part of like childhood and growing up without really knowing the full context.
We're interesting beings, you know, like humans are just interesting folks. Like we're very gullible, and I think that is what makes us so special, is that we can take stories such as this that can proliferate into a whole scene of generation after generation after generation. And that's why I'm kind of stoked of like this resurgence that's happening to kind of bring back all these films, because these films aren't for us. Like Candyman 2021, Nia DaCosta's Candyman, Halloween 2018. I feel like it's for us with fan servicey shit, but at the same time, it's for the new generation. Like it's to get them in and on board to be like, yo, this is the shit that like we grew up on, and you need to check out like the previous stuff or whatever. Like my introduction to Texas Chainsaw Massacre was 2003's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because it was for my generation. And then I was like, oh shit, I didn't know it was a remake. Cool, I'm gonna go check that out now. So it's like that type of stuff. Same thing with Black Christmas. My iteration into Black Christmas was 2006 Black Christmas. So like it's all those things that kind of happen with these particular films. They're not for us. They're not for this generation. Of course, we can watch them and love them or hate them or whatever we want to do with them, but they're not made for us. Like the generation after us, that next up generation, it's theirs. Like, you know, this is going to be their Candyman. That's their Michael
10 to 20
Myers.
years from now, this is going to be someone's scarred for life moment.
Exactly. And that's awesome. Like that is so cool, because like us as humans are extremely gullible, which allows us to have just shit like this that we will believe from time to time again. So
speaking of this being someone else's Scarred for Life movie 10, 20 years down the line, now that you've rewatched, you know, the original OG, are you still as scared as 6-year-old Prince was, or has the movie lost its luster for you?
I wouldn't say I'm scared, and but I also wouldn't say it lost any luster per se. What I would say is that it has and will forever have such a close spot for me in my heart. Like, even with all the gripes aside, like, it is just such a phenomenally well done movie in some ways. Like, as a film in general, like, it is just a masterpiece of a film. And with all the gripes that I do have in it, I overlook them every time because I love this movie so much. And it's just one of those films that I feel like it's just going to forever kind of just be that soft spot for horror where everyone, like, I don't know a single person who doesn't like Candyman. Like, I don't. And I just think it's going to be one of those films that just is going to be forever just a horror gem. And I wish it was talked about a lot more in a part of the Grails, like Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Scream and things like that, because it's unfortunate that it's not considered a part of the Grails. But hey, I mean, it is for me, and I feel like even though like it might not be with that, like it was cool to see Candyman pop up back into the conversation again when Nia DaCosta announced that she was doing it.
Well, that's a perfect way to transition into wrapping up and giving this our rating out of 5. Terry, how many bee-covered rib cages out of 5 do you give Candyman?
Okay, so I do think that if as a movie, as like an experience, I think this movie is pretty damn close to perfection in terms of what it makes me feel and why I love horror films, because it makes me even watching it last night, the moment that it transitions into that full-blown nightmare, the moment that terrified Amy, my friend, back like 20 years ago at this point,
poor Amy.
It's still an effective transition that like turns the rest of the movie into an absolute nightmare. And I love that it can play with that sort of like, it's almost like you're gone through the mirror in this film and you've now entered this nightmare world and nothing is as it seems and nothing makes sense. And I love that it can do that. I love how terrifying it is. I think the acting in this is phenomenal. The score is just perfection. It's weird watching it now as an adult who has like a better understanding of horror and a better understanding of the way the world works, because it's still at the very end when there is the mural of Helen, it has replaced Candyman and it's this white woman that is being celebrated. It's like, oh, why is it ending on this note? Because otherwise it could have been like a really good movie. So I think that some of these things, watching it through a 2022 lens, has like dampened some of my appreciation for the film, but not a whole lot. So I still am wobbling between a 4 and a 4.5 beak-covered rib cages for me, somewhere in between there. I think what this movie is doing is fantastic. What about you, Mary Beth?
I think I give it 4. A lot of the same reasons. I think it's an incredible movie. I think, again, watching it from a lens now, you're like, ooh, a white guy making this movie. But, honestly, it could have been way worse at the same time. You know what I mean?
That's true.
Like, it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but, like, I think he thought he was being sensitive, and that doesn't always translate to good intentions, but,
Yeah.
But I also want to give a shout out to Casey Lemons as Bernadette / Bernie. Oh. My favorite character of the movie. I love her. I love her as the voice of reason. I know that's like kind of a stereotypical black best friend trope, but just like having this voice of reason being like, please, like you need to pump the brakes, white lady, just charging into Cabrini Green and like not having any sense of caution and being like, I can do whatever I want, and like kind of providing this thing of like showing how unrealistic Helen is with a lot of her expectations of how things are going to go and how people are going to interact with her, and finally being confronted with a reality that maybe not everyone wants to talk to her or like reveal their information and trauma and be looked at as a test subject. And I think that there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on here with like academia and that kind of stuff too. And I like, once again, it's a complex movie that every time I watch it, I get more out of it because it's trying to do a lot of stuff, and it's just beautifully done. It's fucking gross. It's so good. And yeah, and Prince, you have the final word. You already said a beautifully eloquent reason for why you love the movie, but how many bee-covered rib cages out of 5 do you give Candyman?
Yeah, I think I would give Candyman 4.5 for sure. And cool. It definitely, as I stated a little bit earlier, it just has such a soft spot for me personally. And yes, seeing it in the lens of 2022 and things like that definitely weigh a lot. And also me seeing it just like as a black person in general, like it definitely weighs a lot. And I do see connotations and things like that just really stick out to me to the point where I'm just like, yeah, that could have not been there. But at the same time, like this film just has such a delicate way of presenting a monster, and it does that in such a way with just pure elegance, and the fact that we get so many rumors and stories, and it takes us 45 minutes to see our villain is incredible. Like, it's really, really incredible to kind of see that aspect of this film and have that be such a secret from even the audience. And it's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Prince, for finally coming on and joining us and talking about this movie, because this was a great conversation. Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have coming up that you can share about your podcast, etc.?
Well, thank you both for having me. This has been an absolute blast. I was very excited to come on this show. But people can find me over on Nightlight, a horror movie podcast. That's Night with a K. You can also see me on Twitter at The Head Night. That's also Night with a K. It's a lot of cool stuff that I got coming down the pipeline. So you'll probably see my name somewhere else.
Hell yeah. So listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience with Candyman? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm McGailey Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. It helps with the algorithms.
Yes, it does. Thank you to Eric Parr for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please stay safe out there. But most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.